Hello everyone. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share new Wendigo horror stories. First story. Not sure if what I saw was a Wendigo/skinwalker. So last night my friend contacted me as he needed a ride home from work, and I was the only one available to do so. Initially his dad was going to give him a ride, but he had an unexpected work emergency come up, so I was his last shot before asking a coworker. He hates asking people he doesn't know closely for things. We live in a inn, so being it was already 9:30 p.m. when he called me, it was dark outside at that point. Now when I say that we live in a inn, I don't mean like way up north in the absolute middle of nowhere, but we live about halfway between St. Cloud and Minneapolis. The drive to pick him up was pretty uneventful as I took County Road 10 from where I live to pick him up. Anyone who lives in a inn knows that this road is basically a more highway for rural smallish towns. I picked him up from the gas station he works at and started the trip to bring him home. Now my friend, I'll just refer to him as Jay so as to not include any direct names, lives out in one of the townships in a inn. This means that for the most part there are mostly either large pastures, as there are lots of farms in these areas, or woods, not much in between. This also means that Jay's house is for the most part in the middle of nowhere, and so are the back roads you need to take to get there. These back roads mean that there's just enough space on the road for 2 cars, and a bit more road on each side for rumble strips to wake anyone who may fall asleep at the wheel before, either a bunch of gravel/grass that lead to a ditch, and then finally woods or aforementioned pastures. I had my high beams on as there are lots of deer and other wildlife out this time of year, so I wanted to see them before it's too late and they total my car. About halfway into the drive, I saw the outline of something in the middle of the road. I assumed this to be a deer, so I slowed down in order to avoid hitting it. Upon coming closer to the figure, however, I saw that it began to resemble a coyote more. This wasn't surprising to me though, as there are lots of those in a inn. They're like rats with how many of them there are. As we came closer to the figure, I got a really uncomfortable feeling as the coyote was refusing to move out of the middle of the road. Another reason that I felt uncomfortable was that while it did look like a coyote, it was just off looking. Now I know how coyotes look. I was in Boy Scouts from kindergarten to 7th grade, and we'd seen plenty while being out camping. But this one, its front and hind legs were about 1 1/2 sizes too long. Its torso was also oversized, and its neck was too long. To top this all off, it was also overly bony and looked like it hadn't eaten in weeks. This is very concerning, as there are plenty of small game that coyotes can feed on in this area. Already I wanted to be out of this place just by the way the thing looked, and the fact that it didn't take off immediately upon the car getting close to it. I really didn't feel like dealing with a rabid coyote. Now to get into the thing that unsettled me the most. As I drove slightly off of the road to go around the thing, I swear the thing looked straight at both of us. I know I wasn't the only one who felt this, as Jay spoke up. Kinda looks like it's staring at us, and gave a slight uneasy chuckle. Now when I say that it looked at us, I don't mean looked at the car, but seemed to lock eye contact with us. Even more unsettling is that its eyes weren't yellow like a typical coyote's, but were green and looked extremely bloodshot. After getting around it, I took off as fast as I could and finished bringing Jay home. He of course joked around and said things like, "Ooh, maybe it was a skinwalker," and laughed at how freaked out I was. The thing is though, this isn't the only time I've had an experience just like this, as I've had another situation when I was driving home from Alexandria around 11 p.m., to which I just shrugged off as it probably being a rabid coyote. But after last night, I'm 99% positive that thing was not just a rabid coyote. I know I'm probably just letting my imagination get the best of me, but the fact that I've had something incredibly similar to this happen in the past makes me think that maybe it's not just a coincidence. Feel free to let me know what all of y'all think, as I'd really like to get more people's input on this and want to make sure I'm not just going crazy. Nonetheless, I think I'm going to try and avoid back roads as much as I can for the next few months here. Who knows, maybe it'll have followed me now that I'm talking about it, and I'll have more stories in the near future. Second story, The Lady in the Woods. This is another story that takes place up north in Michigan, but it happened to my dad. At least, he swears it did. My dad and his buddy were staying a weekend up at the cabin, and they were having a fire near the front of the driveway by the smaller cabin. They were drinking beers and telling stories, catching up and whatnot. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, in between the crackling of the fire and his buddy telling a story, they heard a woman cry out, "Help me!" Thinking they were just really buzzed, they paid it no mind and continued their conversation. Then it happened again. "Help me, please help me." My dad and his friend looked at each other shocked. "I definitely heard it that time, dude. What do we do?" My dad reached for the flashlight and clicked it on. "Help me, please." The woman cried again. My dad shined the flashlight around the woods, trying to locate the woman. "If you can see us, come towards the light. Come towards us." My dad and his buddy shouted as the flashlight lit up the small patch of woods and cast dancing shadows everywhere. Then all of a sudden, there she is. This skinny, frail-looking woman stumbled out from the shadows. She was covered in blood and her hair was matted. Her dress has been sliced apart. My dad got a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Oh my God, are you okay? What happened? How can we help?" This was before cell phones, so there was no way to phone the police. The woman collapsed and my father and his buddy hoisted her up around their shoulders, leading her to a bench where she could sit down. She was sobbing uncontrollably as they draped a blanket over her and did the best they could to tend to her wounds. When she was able to gain her composure, she told my dad and his friend the story. Apparently, she was with her boyfriend out in a car in the woods, and he wanted to do things she wasn't ready for. She rejected him, but he tried to force himself on her. He beat her up, slashed her dress, then kicked her out of the car before peeling off. She then started wandering the woods looking for help before stumbling across my dad and his buddy. They cleaned her up a little more and let her crash in the cabin for the night. In the morning, they took her home. She gave them both a hug and kiss on the cheek before disappearing inside. A few days later, they went back to the house to check on the lady from the woods, but her mother answered the door. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked. Yes, ma'am, we dropped off a woman here a few days ago, and she was in rough shape. We were just checking in on her." "Oh, you mean my daughter?" "I think so. Can we see a picture?" Her mother went back inside the house and came back with a picture of her daughter. When my dad and his buddy confirmed it was her, the mother gave a little laugh. "Boys, my daughter has been dead for 10 years. If you did see her, it's because it was the anniversary of her death." My dad stood there stunned. "I appreciate yous coming by, though. It's nice to know she's still around." Her mother chuckled as she shut the door, leaving them speechless. They turned around and headed back to the car. My dad always says that wasn't the scary part. What still baffles him and his friend to this day is when they looked back at the house before pulling the car door open, only to be met with a vacant lot with a "for sale" sign. Third story, Appalachian Wendigo? So this story is from a few years ago, but me and my mother remember every single detail of what happened, but I would like some advice. So when I was about in 7th or 8th grade, me and my mom were driving home from a therapy appointment of mine. Note, nothing for being schizoid, just depression and such. It was winter and a full moon because I remember the snow glowing under the moon. It was only 6 but really dark out because, it's in the middle of winter. So we are going about 55 miles per hour when this thing crosses and stops in front of us. The only way I can describe it is that it was if you combined a deer, a dog, and a human. It stood about as tall as our windshield. It had the legs of what I can describe as a deer. Its back was hunched over and walking on all fours. It had the head of a dog. Note, it didn't have ears or dog nose, but its eyes were white and it didn't have a tail. The freakish thing about this creature was its skin. It wasn't a canine with mange or anything. It had actual human skin all the way down its legs, too long to be dog legs. It smelt of rotting meat, and some parts the flesh was broken open like if you would scrape your knee. It was pale white, and you could see its veins. And this thing was fast, like it stood there and just ran across the road in the blink of an eye. Me and my mom had to pull over to calm down. We both saw it. For some context, I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, where I have heard other people describe what I saw as a not deer, but it was way more human than deer. Any suggestions? Fourth story. Wendigo outside the camper. I realize how unbelievable this story might be, but I assure you it's entirely true. I've had countless experiences with the supernatural since I was 4. I'm 33 now, but this is one of the most terrifying ones I've had. I've looked at some of the stories in this community to see if there's anything I haven't discovered yet. I thought that if I shared my encounter here, there might be someone who has some information that could help. Please don't comment if you don't believe in the supernatural. I've seen skeptics plastering their 2 cents on some posts. I'm looking for legitimate information. My questions are at the end of this. Thanks in advance. I had an experience with a Wendigo this fall in early October in northern Minnesota in a state forest very close to, if not on, a reservation. I've always heard that speaking of them can draw them to you, but I hadn't thought of or listened to any Wendigo stories any time close to my encounter. I was staying with some very dear friends. I'll call them M and C, and they have a camper in their yard by the lake for guests to sleep in. I had walked down to the camper from the house with my miniature dachshund, Ebony, around midnight and found that I needed to set some things up, primarily the heater. By the time I was done getting everything in order, it was approximately 1:30. I never thought to lock the door because, really, I figured it's in the middle of the woods, so there was nothing to worry about. I was wrong. I had closed the curtains, thank God, and I was having trouble falling asleep because my anxiety was going mad. M and C's dogs were barking outside, and their geese wouldn't stop honking. Ebony, who usually sleeps under the covers, was sitting on my hip while I laid on my side, and I could feel her turning her head back and forth, like she was trying to track something outside. I tried tucking her under the blankets to calm her down, but she kept returning to her perch on my hip. I have no idea how long I laid there. I would say at least 40 minutes, when all of a sudden I heard M's voice outside the camper. "Anybody in there?" And what sounded like claws dragged down the side of the camper. I almost called back to her when I realized, number 1, she and C were both fast asleep by now, and number 2, M knew I was in there. She wouldn't ask if anybody was. Suddenly, I noticed everything had gone absolutely silent outside. The dogs and the birds had stopped carrying on. The gusts of wind had even stopped. It was the kind of silence you hear about in horror stories. How the woods go mute when something evil is in the area. Then another thought hit me. Ebony would be losing her *T and barking at the door if that had been anything human. She was frozen on my hip, dead quiet, shaking. I didn't dare to move, but I was really starting to have to pee. And I remembered that I hadn't locked the door. I have no idea how long I laid there debating whether I should get up and use the bathroom and lock the door, but it felt like an eternity. In reality, I guessed it was maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I thought it may have been a skinwalker at first, but remembered they don't mimic the voices of your loved ones to lure you into the woods. WENDIGO. I knew these creatures, demons, whatever they are, can lure humans out of their abodes if they make eye contact with you, and everything in me was screaming to make sure I didn't look outside. I made doubly sure I didn't look through any cracks in the curtains as I walked softly to the front of the camper and very slowly turned the lock, praying and holding my breath. I made sure to keep my eyes away from the windows as I crawled back in bed and pulled Ebony close, and she finally stayed under the blankets. I snuck a peek at my phone for the time before I laid down, figuring it had to be close to 3 a.m., the witching hour. It was about 2:30. As soon as I laid down, the wind kicked back up and M&C's basset hounds erupted into howls as they came running down to the camper and a little ways into the trees, and the geese started their noise again. I heard the bassets come back to the camper, barking a few more times before they laid down outside the door to protect me. I didn't get out of bed again that night. I told M&C what had happened the next morning. I think I was hoping M would say she had come down to check on me and Ebony, but she confirmed what I already knew. They had gone to bed as soon as I had left the house. I said a prayer over their house, the camper, and all of us the following night and had an uneventful night. Thank God. I also spoke with another guy who's familiar with the supernatural to see if he knew any more about Wendigo. I'm not sure how accurate the information he gave me was, or if it's reliable at all, but when I asked him why Ebony hadn't made a peep, I had assumed it was because she was absolutely petrified. He said a Wendigo can control animals to keep them from alerting their owners about its presence. He also told me they can't enter houses that aren't made of wood directly from the forest they're hunting in, tents and campers included, because they consist of man-made materials too. A lock is useless. They can unlock and open a door so they can try to lure you outside. And 3. They typically stay in the woods, but they will come into a smaller town and never into a city. I had never heard of any of what he told me before, so again, I can't speak for accuracy, but I also haven't researched the claims either. He also advised me never to go outside to pee at night if I ever go camping, and to bring a bucket or something to use, and to make sure that I always close tent flaps and curtains before falling asleep. He said if the flaps are open so you can see outside, the Wendigo can make eye contact with you and draw you out. After leaving M&C's to go to my father's house for a few days, I had the distinct feeling of being watched when I took Ebony outside after dark. My father lives 3 hours away from M&C, but his house is in the country. I told myself it was only the fear from the experience and what I know about the Wendigo triggering an overactive imagination. I never heard anything, and I watched Ebony's behavior very closely, and she didn't act like she had in the camper. I'm moving back to that area from Canada, and this experience has been weighing heavily on my mind. I've been trying to find any information about warding them off, or if they have a home hunting range like cougars do, or if they move on from a region. My prayers did work the second night, so I figure I can pray over the property. I also have holy water that I can use, since the Wendigo is an evil spirit that possesses people or physically manifests. Frustratingly, a majority of what comes up in searches is utter garbage like Wikipedia. Does anyone know if a Wendigo stays in one area? Are my concerns about it coming back when I get moved into my cabin warranted? Or am I worrying excessively? Do you have any tips for warding them off? Thanks again for any information you can offer. Update. I have received very sound advice to seek the help of the elders at the closest reserve when I move back to the area, so I am going to do that first thing. I'm hoping not to encounter this entity again, but I intend to seek counsel from the elders and follow their recommendations to the letter. Fourth story. Well, I saw it. I don't really know how to start this post. It's my first one. At the time of writing this, I am living in western Pennsylvania, a little south of Pittsburgh. I was in Boy Scouts for most of my life, so I feel very comfortable in the woods and go camping often. Upon hearing Governor Wolf's school closure plan, I decided that it was time for some cold weather camping. It was March. It wasn't that cold, but it did drop to 40 F at night. And the people who I went weren't really avid campers. If you're from Pittsburgh, you may know the Boggs campsite on the Montour Trail. That's where we went. They, of course, only brought weed and alcohol and didn't bring any sleeping bags, blankets, or pillows, so naturally I assumed they were gonna have to sit by the fire all night. It was light when we first got there, and the fire pit was still smoldering, very cool. We used the coals from the previous campers' fire to light ours, and immediately I knew that I would have to provide wood for the fire until I went to bed. They passed out beers at around 3 p.m. Times are gonna be a bit dodgy because I wasn't near my phone, and after having 2 to 3 beers I just wanted dinner. Now, that they did for me. They made ramen noodles and cheese, which was amazing. They had a weird name for it, and burgers over the fire. By this time, it would have had to have been close to 5 p.m. because it started to rain a little bit, as was forecasted. So we took shelter in the lean-to shelter that was on site, and occasionally one of them would throw some sticks on the fire. Sticks were all they seemed to be able to find, even though I brought 2 saws and an axe, and I would cut up some logs. By the time the rain stopped, all 4 of us smoked a blunt and were sitting around the fire. I was light out so well, call it 7 p.m. After a while of just hanging out, they asked if I had any blankets. I always have blankets. Nothing special, but we've had some pretty bad snowstorms in the past, and a couple scratchy car blankets are always useful. They each got a blanket except for R, as we'll call him, who got my summer sleeping bag that I brought just in case. By now it was dark, 9 to 9:30 p.m., and the fire was getting low. I start off to find some more wood because they wanted to smoke another blunt. Now you have to understand that I'm 6 feet 5 inches and a semi-frequent user of the devil's lettuce, so my tolerance is kinda high. I return with the wood and we spark up another blunt, a smaller one, and just kinda hang out and talk and listen to music while we're high as shit. Good times. Eventually the fire, again, dies down a little bit, and again, it's my job to get more wood. Because we had been there for a while, and there were people there before us, most of the wood near the shelter was either really small or all used up, so I had to keep going farther and farther away from camp to find wood. 12:30 a.m., close to 50 F still, so we're all doing well. I have a flashlight, a really nice one that I use for scuba diving, that is kinda bright, so I use it on the low setting on land. At this point, I'm far enough away from camp that my friends can't really see me. There's like an embankment between the Montour Trail and someone's driveway that you have to cross to get to more woods. But I'm comfortable alone because I knew what I was doing and they could FS hear me if I needed them. I start to hear a weird whistling sound, kinda like someone inhaling through a snorkel, but I chalk it up to the wind. The air was starting to get kinda cold, so I just took back what I had and put some on the fire. 1 to 2 a.m., 40 F with some wind, nothing severe. I have on 2 long sleeve shirts and an army surplus coat that is super warm, but my friends are in windbreakers and hoodies and, oh yeah, it's raining. Off to get more wood. This time I started taking into consideration the type of wood that I would collect. There was a lot of pine, but that burns fast, which is why I had to go collect it so often. The stretch of woods near the driveway was pretty much all pine. A few maples, but nothing big. So I keep walking knowing that this area has both conifers and deciduous trees in close proximity to each other. As I'm wandering and collecting wood, I notice that the rain has turned to a super fine snow. Time to head back, just in case it picks up. Then the whistling started again, a lot louder now. Okay, weird. There isn't any more wind than there was before. Maybe it changed directions. I keep walking. By now I can hear the music from camp and pick up the pace a little bit. Just as I summit the embankment and prepare to clamber down the other side, a loud noise echoes behind me. Tree fell? Shining my flashlight around, I couldn't see any signs that that was the case and didn't see any source. Deer knocked something over? In my head it doesn't matter because I'm back at camp anyways, and I can try the marsh behind our shelter next time.
3 Uhr nachts.
They were cold. The temperature dropped to around 30°F and the wind and snow had picked up. Car blankets helped the boys a little bit, but they weren't able to go sleep in the tent that I brought without freezing, except for R, who slept like a rock all night after about 3:30. We decide to finish off the weed and give the last beers a good talking to. For 30 a.m., I'm about ready for bed at this point because I'm not super high or drunk or anything, but I was definitely tired. I offer to go collect more wood before I retire to my 0-degree sleeping bag and cot. I camp comfy when I don't have to carry it far. And they said they would join me. They must have been cold. We split up and I end up heading back to where I was before, except this time I left my flashlight on high, and I made a bunch of noise to scare off that deer or whatever that was there earlier. I end up a little further away from camp than I had intended to be because there were only pine branches on the ground over here. Then the whistling starts again. This time I could tell the direction it was coming from, my left, and shine my flashlight around that area before just returning to collecting wood. Then the sound stops briefly, then picks up again in a different direction less than a minute later, this time in front of me and a little to the right, back into the pines. Maybe the branches of certain trees catch the wind just right and make the noise. I think, whatever, and move on. Then on my way back the noise was following me, darting from left to right, but always like right behind me. I don't see anything, so whatever. Then the noise makes like one sharp whistle and pauses. Then I hear it. Damn, it's cold out here. It was R, but I couldn't find him with my flashlight, so I called, "Where you at?" And it sounded like he turned around because I heard a branch snap and a bit of movement. I pointed my flashlight at where the sound was coming from, and I didn't see her anywhere. Maybe he's behind a bush or a tree or something. I call out again, "R." No reply this time. Yikes. He might be lost or something because we weren't at camp, and he saw my flashlight moving, so he came to look. "R, where are you?" Nothing. Then louder. I'm going back to camp because I thought he was trying to scare me. Shining my flashlight around one last time, I spot something dive into a bush about 40 feet from where I had heard her turn around. "I see you, big man. Grab some wood and come back." He's 6 foot and 230 to 250 pounds. I shine the light around for a few more seconds, then turn around again and start walking. The whistling is back. Cool, love that. No matter what speed I moved at, it always seemed the same distance away. I decide that I just kinda sit under a tree and wait for her to pass by because he had to come back sometime, right? I wanted to save the battery of my flashlight, so I turned it off and closed one eye, so it would adjust faster. By now the snow had picked up a good bit, which is another reason to stop, in case her got lost. I couldn't really see super far because there was a lot of cloud cover despite it being a full moon. The whistling never got closer, but it did start to move around a little bit, in a really odd circle. It would start in one spot, stop, then promptly start in another spot that was in a different direction. I realized that it had to be the wind or something because it was moving super fast and was moving at random. Cool, now where the fuck is R? I turn on my flashlight between whistles and call out again, "R." It's important to note here that the whistling never picked up while I looked around. It normally only stopped for a second or two. It was super quiet. Was laying on the ground, and we had 2 to 3 in on the ground by now, so maybe that muffled it? Anyways, upon not hearing her, I thought that maybe I missed him or didn't hear him at all and started to head back to camp. As I stood up and brushed the dirt off my ass, I shined the flashlight around one more time. I was thinking in my head, I definitely heard him. After I stood up with the wood in my arms and began to walk back towards camp, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. My flashlight, being a diving light, has a wrist mount that I was wearing so I could use it and carry things. I turned towards and scanned the area with my flashlight. Nothing. Fucking deer. Not even 4 steps more and I saw another movement. Now the whistling was back. Damn, that gets annoying. Sounds like a fat guy who just ran up the stairs. Flashlight was on low, so I could see maybe 40 feet around me and didn't see anything, but I knew it was time to pick up the pace. Now the whistling was followed by flashes of movement. Great. It's not the wind. At this point I'm speed walking. Being tall I can move if I have to, and I was definitely traveling at jogging speed. A lumbering beast when he runs, could not move this fast or this quietly through the woods. Nice. Another thing that it's not. I decided to turn off the flashlight and move into some brush that was close by. Not sure why, but I was getting a little weirded out and had the shakes even though I was warm. It was silent again. Well, fuck me, what is it? Is it hunting me? Coyote? Not a coyote. There was a good period of silence, then there was whistling. This time it wasn't doing circles around me. It was just moving around where I had turned off the flashlight. My eyes adjusted and I peeked out from under the bush that I was rolled up under. I tried. Nothing. Just that damned whistling. By this point I was pretty much sober. Like if I got pulled over I could nail the field sobriety test. I waited for a little while, the thing just kinda looked around. Then I heard it speak. In a really gargled impression of me it called out, "Big man." It took everything I had not to panic. Holy shit. Not human, not a deer, not the wind. Oh fuck. Then it spoke again. Cutting off really strangely, like you just lifted the needle off of a record, but picking back up again with "back to camp," still in my voice. My fucking voice. I normally don't like hearing recordings of myself anyways, but now I really don't like them. It said a few more things, in different voices that I didn't recognize. All the voices were either talking about how cold it was or questions like, "What was that?" and "Stop fucking with me." But they all seemed like whoever was talking had some phlegm built up in their throat. Then it went quiet. I poked my head out of the bushes again and saw something sitting against a tree in the same position I had been in. Left leg straight out, right leg at an angle, hands behind my head. It could have fooled me as being we both kinda sit the same way, except his ADHD usually makes him fidget with his hands. Okay, so who's sitting in the woods with me? I lay there, silent, and just watch. It begins to whistle. So that's where that was coming from. It moves its hand around in a fist out in front of it, the same way that I look around with my flashlight, and then started to stand up. Oh fuck, it's tall. I only weigh 166, skin and bone mostly, so when I say that this thing was skinny, don't take it lightly. I could see how thin its long, spindly arms were silhouetted against the snow that coated a bush behind it. When it stood up, it was hunched over. Not sure if I was slouching when I stood up, but I certainly do slouch. It walked a few paces away from the tree and stood up the whole way. Holy shit. I worked with backdrops for theater productions, and the walls we use the most are around 8 feet high, and this thing would have easily been able to see over one. I'm talking by at least a foot. It slowly peered around. No hair on its head, and its side profile showed a super disfigured skull. The jaw hung pretty far down, and there weren't really lips that stuck out, but it was hard to tell because of how dark it was. It let out one final Big man. Kinda like someone with tortures would say it, because they were just random words that it strung together. Then it screamed. My dad used to take me to air shows a lot as a kid, and this has to have been the same pitch and volume as an F-16. I couldn't move. It peered around, head just seemingly sweeping the area. Then it crouches down and leaps for a tree with the lowest branch being around 10 to 15 feet and lands feet first on one of the branches and sits there, squatting, whistling, and just staring around. Then it takes off. Faster than should be allowed in nature. I count 10 in my head. The forest sleeps. I slowly make my way out from under the bush and begin to creep back towards camp, this time avoiding using my flashlight or making any noise if possible. I climb the embankment and take one last look towards the woods, unsure if that just happened or if I was asleep. I tumble down the other side of the embankment, and returned to the relative safety of the big ass fire with Y and J, the other two who went for wood. "Where's your wood?" asks Y. "Oh, it had bugs. It's fine, we got a lot anyways." They stacked up a solid pile of oak and pine. Not enough for the night, but enough for a little while at least. "Where's our?" I ask warily. "Check the tent." There he was, passed the fuck out, snoring the way he always does. Well, okay then. I climbed into my sleeping bag to warm up a little bit, because I was covered in snow when I got back, and it screamed again. "Oh, please don't tell me it's coming here." The other two looked at me wide-eyed. Normally, if I recognize a sound, I say what it is out loud, so they know what's up. I had no response. They asked if I heard the first one. Good, they heard it too. I answered with a nod as I unlocked the car in case we needed to book it. They asked if I saw it. Nod. What was it? No fucking clue. I described it to them quietly so that I could listen for more noises, and I told them about it, imitating my voice. While I was pretty freaked out, Jay thought I was bullshitting him and said it was some kind of owl. I got out of my sleeping bag, threw my coat back on, and joined them at the fire. For the first time in a while, I looked at my phone. 5:45 a.m. We looked up native owl calls and came up empty-handed. The same happened with every other animal we tried. Jay seemed a little nervous. Y suggested that maybe it's a truck on the highway. "Yeah, that's probably it," I replied blankly, and Jay gave me a look that said that he knew it probably wasn't. They didn't sleep. I forced sleep upon myself so that we wouldn't die on the car ride home. The next morning we went for a walk. It didn't snow much after I got back, so you could kind of follow my footprints. The tree the thing leapt into was out of reach of me on Jay's shoulders. I was still asleep, but I think I might have been able to reach it if I was on his. The tree I sat under had scratch marks on it. I think they're from deer shedding the velvet off of their antlers, but it creeped me out nonetheless. The tree it sat under had footprints everywhere. There seemed to be no order to them at all. It was amazing. It looked like it had run over every square inch of that area, coming as close to the bush I was in as 2 me lengths. I don't really know much about cryptids or anything, but when I got home I Googled North American tall skinny cryptid, and the second result was from Parade, a list of cryptids. After ruling out everything else on the list, I came across the picture of a Wendigo that has antlers, not quite but pretty close, described as tall and skinny and super fast. I did my research and every picture has antlers, but I can't find any evidence that, other than a few movies, it had antlers. IDK. What I saw definitely didn't have antlers, but it matched everything else, even down to the whistling. This was kinda long, but I'd appreciate some feedback. I posted this first on another subreddit, r/cryptids, but it wasn't received well. Fifth story. There were 2 Wendigo outside my dad's house last night. So, last night my friends and I were driving around aimlessly and ended up on the side of town near my deceased father's house. I go there from time to sit on the steps, say hi, and that I miss him. And since every year for Valentine's Day since I was a kid my dad was my Valentine, I really wanted to stop by the house and give it a hug, but I don't think I'm going back. At around 11 p.m., we stop at the top of the road and I run down the exponential function of a driveway and run up to the garage and hug the house before quickly running up the stairs to the front porch. I rest my head on the front door and I feel my entire body start shaking like I'm sobbing when only a few tears run down my face. Just as this overwhelming feeling starts to come over me and I feel lightheaded, my friend, Duke, calls me and says to get back to the car. He'll tell me why when I get there. Without hesitation, I sprint up the icy driveway without stopping, and thank God not slipping and falling. When I get to the car, we take off doing 50 down the road. I'm still crying and can barely breathe, and my friend, Riley, keep asking me if I'm okay and if I need anything. When I'm able to pull myself together, I ask what made them call me back to the car. Duke doesn't say anything for a few minutes and keeps driving while I keep pestering him about what he saw that made him call me. When we get to a stop sign, he grips the wheel tighter and says he saw a head poking out behind my dad's house, a little bit taller than the garage doors. After a minute of silence, I asked him what it looked like. Duke said it popped its head out around the side of the house 2 times. And by the time I was sprinting up the stairs, Riley saw another head come out behind the neighbor's house that she initially thought was a dog head, but soon realized the head was too massive to be a dog's. We take off down the road and all go and crash at my house after getting some McDonald's, with Duke checking the windows until we had fallen asleep. I think he may have spotted another one outside my house. My dog was flipping out and trying to get to all the doors in my house at once. I don't know what happened. I don't know why my whole body was shaking and why I felt I was going to pass out, but I think my dad protected me. And I know I'm not going back to that house. 6th story. My first and only hunting trip with my grandfather. My grandfather died a few months ago, and I felt that, in order to properly honor his memory, I needed to share this tale. I have a lot of stories about him, but I felt this was the one that was most important. He made me the man I am today. When I was growing up, I would spend summers at my grandparents' home in northern Washington. Their home was surrounded by a forest with nothing but a small dirt trail leading in and out. They lived around 5 hours outside any town, so we mostly had fish, game, and whatever they were growing that season. The majority of the time I spent there was spent fishing, gardening, or listening to my grandfather's tales from when he was a young man in Ireland. On my 14th birthday, he took me hunting for the first time. I gathered our bags and hunting bows and met him out front. He took his gear and handed me a small sprig from the blackthorn tree out back. Back in Ireland, he would keep them on him as a way to ward away evil spirits and take some with him every time he leaves the house. I figured it was just something he did as a sort of good luck charm, like a rabbit's foot. I tucked it into my back pocket, and we set out on his normal hunting trail. It was nearly night before we set up camp. He was an old-fashioned camper, no tent or sleeping bag for him. He would only ever bring a blanket, pillow, and a fire steel. Once everything was set up, not that it took very long, he started telling another story from Ireland. A few hours and a meal of jerky and bread later, we went asleep. I woke up a few hours before sunrise. The forest was never particularly loud, especially compared to our home in Seattle, but that night it was as if someone had muted everything. The fire had burned down to ash, and the night was lit by nothing but a small crescent moon, just enough to see it by. A dark figure stood just beyond the tree line, staring into the camp at me. I had never felt as terrified as I was that night. I had no idea what it was. It looked too tall for a human, and it made no sound as it started towards me, inching its way through the brush. I was frozen, too scared to move or even blink. I could just barely see the moon's glint in its eyes as it crossed the boundary into our makeshift camp. They were deep and dark, a terrible hunger in them. The closer it got to me, the more of it I could make out. Its body was tall, but emaciated. Arms too long for its body, pulled close to its chest, tipped with several inch-long claws. It swayed and stumbled as it walked, never quite getting close enough to fall. It stopped a few feet from me, the hideous globes of its eyes never moving from mine. Just as it raised its arms and lunged for me, the sharp sound of an arrow zipping by broke the silence. It pierced into the beast's throat, covering the ground and its onyx flesh with blood. Its horrible scream rang through the night, breaking the hold my fear held on me, and I scrambled away from it. I hit something warm and solid behind me, but before I could even register that I'd stopped, a familiar hand on my shoulder threw me to the side, and my grandfather rushed the beast, a bright white blade in his hand. The beast burned as his blade cut into it, the smell of burning flesh adding to the metal scent in the air. All in all, it had only lasted a minute or so between when I first saw it and when it lay on the ground, an unmoving mass of flesh and mottled, black fur. My grandfather said it would be too dangerous to leave before then, but even more so to stay another night. We packed our bags up again, ate a small meal, and waited for daybreak. We headed back as soon as the sun came up. Before we left, I noticed something odd. My grandfather's sprig of blackthorn was tied around the arrow in the beast's throat. That was the last time we visited them for years. Seventh story, Wendigo Hill. The following account is 100% truthful and took place at 3 a.m. on October 31st, 2020. My friends and I always go on walks together past midnight. In the woods, along the roads, anything. We usually have 4 people, but this time Ben, the guy whose house we were staying at, could have 6 people over. So the 6 of us walked along the road to this Verizon tower on this hill. The stars look very nice up there at night, so we always do it. We get halfway up the hill, and we're feeling uneasy. It's a full moon on Halloween after all. Nick, the oldest and most stoic out of us, the one who never jokes about or believes in the paranormal or anything, points his flashlight ahead on the trail. What the F is that? He rarely swears, so this was another attention-grabbing thing. We all stop and look ahead. About 20 paces ahead of us there it was. 8 feet tall, white as snow. A skin and bone, lanky, bipedal being within a stone's throw. 6 people all saw this at the same time. It takes off into the woods at superhuman speed. We stop and are silent for a moment. We immediately start asking if everyone saw it, and everyone did. We argue and cuss, and I try my hardest to convince the others to turn back and forget it. But fearless Ben, who doesn't believe in anything, begs to push on. We do. Now I've cut down a lot of trees in my day, so I know what it sounds like when one falls. On the continuation of our voyage, less than a minute later, a tree slams to the ground on the side of the trail. It didn't fall, it was pulled down with force. We stop and argue. We push on. A minute after that, we hear a rustle and a loud, painful chirp from a bird. We make it to the tower and look around us. The top of the hill is mostly devoid of trees, so we look down at the path where it ran. Ben is still trying to convince us he isn't afraid. We decide to run the half-mile back down to his house. We get there and Ben starts crying. He has never ever believed in anything his whole life. But he saw something up there. We all saw something up there. I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. We've gone back up there, but we haven't seen anything. I've done a lot of research into it. I have no doubt in my mind it was a Wendigo. 8th story, my Wendigo encounter. This story takes place in the backcountry of the area I grew up in. Be warned. Some of this might be too frightening for some.
Reader discretion is advised.
So back in 2019, I remember there being a big uproar of unknown creatures roaming the forest, like Bigfoot and skinwalkers. But this story isn't about them. This story is about probably one of the scariest things I think I've ever heard about. The Wendigo. A few months after one of my friends, Jacob, mentioned this big uproar, I went to go see him since I had been away enlisted in the United States Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was go and see him. We're having a good old time, and he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot his now ex-girlfriend took him to when they wanted to get away for a few hours. So I decided why not. So I grabbed my gun and we went out to this extremely secluded area and started messing around on the old dock that was there. It had been pretty much forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained, and some boards were almost completely rotted through. So about 30 minutes into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary even for me. Curious, I asked him about it. He said that if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest looking thing you've ever seen. Me calling his bluff, I told him to prove it. To this day, I wished I hadn't. We start walking on this little path that lead deep into the thick woods close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20-ish minutes and decided we were in a good spot. I feel it's worth knowing that it had been raining a lot over the past couple days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob, and he dares me to do it. I stood there, in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying in the wind high above our heads. Reluctantly, I slowly started to say it. Wendigo. 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 Then, nothing happened. I let out a silent sigh of relief at the fact that nothing happened. One thing about mine and Jacob's friendship is we loved it when one of us proved the other wrong about something. In our friendship of 10 years, I think it was one of the first times I had proven him wrong at anything. We started to talk a little bit of shit back and forth at each other when we heard a noise in the distance. Me still having the reflexes I had from the Marines, I immediately snapped towards the direction of the noise that were just then turning into noises. I started to move closer to the noises, and then shortly after we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed another sigh of relief, but that relief didn't last long since I knew something was up. I didn't know what was up at first, but I just knew it was time for me and Jacob to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden, a tall pine tree started to groan and creak as it started to come down. Noticing this, and in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forward as the tree came falling through the rest of the branches and landed right in between us. Jacob let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped the tree to get to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him to his feet. He was still terrified and still practically crying as I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Move, Jacob! Fucking move now!" I spun him around really hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I quickly got him up, and we both started to sprint down the path back in the direction we came. I didn't dare look back, and neither did Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. "Jacob! Jacob, come quick!" It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned and tried to get past me. The whole time he was screaming, "Olivia!" I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me. It's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Just then another pine tree started to buckle. I saw it just in time to tackle Jacob down to the ground as both of us were nearly crushed. I screamed at Jacob once more. "Go. Get out of here. Go now." As I was screaming that, I pulled my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail in the direction from whence we came. Jacob made it to the opening of the trail and turned back and noticed I was still aiming my gun down the trail. "Bradley, get out of there. Come on, hurry." I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing a good 50 feet, I turned and me and Jacob both saw it. The thing we had ushered into showing itself. The Wendigo. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There was practically no meat on its bones. It had really skinny legs and even skinnier arms. Its skin a pale white, almost like a vampire's. But the thing I noticed the most about it were the eyes. A vibrant blue, almost like lightsaber blue for those who have seen Star Wars. Having had enough fear, I raised my gun and fired at the Wendigo. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I had killed it, turned and ran towards the car. I turned and did the same thing as he passed me. That was my first experience with this so-called Wendigo, and I pray, almost every night, I never have to encounter something that terrifying again. 9th story. Wendigo encounter in Maine, perhaps multiple. Throughout my youth and through adulthood, I've had several encounters with entities and energies that are not of this realm, at least not as far as science and history is concerned. These past few years especially, I've had several terrifying experiences being stalked while taking walks late at night around Turner, Maine. Sometimes I'm overcome with a sense of fear that's animalistic, and an innate sense of paranoia consumes me, as if something is watching from the woods and I need to get to safety fast. On other occasions, I've actually had something, quite aggressively, follow me, alongside me from the tree line, chasing me away from certain areas, whispering in a low, human-like tone as it moves in the woods alongside me. It sounds like human footsteps crunching across tree branches, leaves, but so much larger, heavier than any human can step. This thing also can hurl itself from treetop to treetop. The power of it's so great that it has actually knocked down trees, full goddamn trees, as it leaps. I could not fucking make this shit up. It is terrifying to be followed by something that's whispering as it walks in the trees beside you, even when you're running. B, can seemingly teleport from one side of the road to the other in seconds. C, is so big it can knock down trees as it jumps from top to top. And D, is so evasive. It can do all of these things while remaining hidden and not perceived by the naked eye. Besides those encounters, I've actually visually seen something I can only relate as a Wendigo. It was either comfortable enough with my energy to reveal itself, or something else altogether. Maybe it wanted to eat me, maybe it wanted to possess me, maybe it wanted to speak to me. I really don't know, because I didn't stick around long enough to find out. The energy of this thing, the way it looked, was so offensive, so terrifying. I only remained long enough to visualize what I instinctively knew was coming through the woods and was about to show itself to me. I was frozen while I waited for this thing to come out of the woods. Looking back, I don't know if it was curiosity or the power of the creature itself. I locked eyes with this thing, and when I did, I was suddenly watching myself from its perspective, as if I was now inside the creature. Horrified, I tore myself away. Luckily, I was on the front steps right next to the door, and ran inside with a lit cigarette. I was so scared, I wasn't even thinking any thought besides run. Now, I locked the door, hurried to my bedroom, and screamed for my housemate. I refused to even step out of my bedroom for the entire night, and I pulled down the blinds. This particular encounter was so terrifying I was shaking for hours and didn't sleep that night. Some definite details I can remember of this creature was that its face was sunken in, its head very large in size. Where its eyes should have been were craters of black, and in the middle, golden, glowing orbs, very bright and flame-like. It was on all fours, but this thing can 100% easily walk if it wanted to, no problem. The creature was very thin. I remember that detail very clear. Its chest was near skeletal, and its stomach caved in as if it hadn't eaten in 100 years. Its arms and legs both were very long. Both arms and legs were insanely muscled and massive. Honestly, its arms and legs were the only part of the creature's anatomy that had any mass about it. The creature itself was big. I'm talking like 10 foot tall easy. And if I had to guess, it weighed anywhere between 500 to 600 pounds. It seemingly had fur covering some parts of its body, along the tops of its arms, back, and thighs, but the fur was scarce. Initially, I thought werewolf, but after looking up different cryptids, I can safely say I don't think it was that. Another detail I remember was its mouth. This thing was smiling at me. Its teeth were razor sharp, almost needle-like and long. The size of its smile and the teeth took up most of its face. Where a nose should have been, There were just nostrils, almost like a skull. Its face actually was very skull-like. The whole body very skeletal. Anyway, I just would really like to talk to somebody who has had similar experiences, or somebody who can relate. This thing, by the way, was not the only cryptid I've encountered or been chased by. The Androscoggin and all around Androscoggin County is very terrifying. Old, haunted, and linked to some type of portal or some shit. Leyline, perhaps? All of this is just dust in the wind, and only things I know as fact are from what I personally have witnessed and heard. So many times at night, while walking along the river, I've heard screams so terrifying, so otherworldly, I can only relate it to the cry of a banshee. In the woods around Lake Auburn and also around Empty Appetite, heading toward Mechanic Falls and then, in the other direction, towards Sabatis and Turner, this area has insanely negative, abrasive, offending energy, and if you're going to walk at night, try to be aware. And yes, I know how all of this sounds. Rest assured, I'm not delusional or any sense of crazy. I'm just looking to hear other stories of a similar nature. 10th story. The rules of our woods. The path through the woods is so twisted and winding that it doubles back at some points, and at others you could cut out 5 minutes of walking if you were willing to race just a few hundred yards straight ahead. Nobody would, though. Don't be foolish. I have been walking for half an hour when I see a pair of cherries on the path, but not touching it. They appear to have fallen perfectly, so that their stems are held up gently by ferns. I duck down to examine the berries and find them almost perfect, and I reach my hand to touch it when, don't pick up their gifts. Dash, one of the warnings I've heard all my life rings clearly in my head. Are these fruit really a gift, though? There are certainly cherry trees in these woods, and though I can't see any right now, that doesn't mean that there are none close enough for this to be a natural occurrence. I eat the berries and continue on my way. In our village, adults tell children what to do in the woods before they are old enough to venture out there. Before they're even old enough to walk, in some cases. If you take their gifts, listen to the whispers in the forest, insult them, or leave the trail for any reason, then you could be taken. Some children who are taken are replaced by false, corrupted versions. Some are merely removed, never to be seen again. They never replace the adults. As a teenager teetering between childhood and adulthood, I wonder whether their rules would allow them to send a replica back in my stead. I wonder if they would even want to. The whispers started up a few minutes later. I can't remember if they alarmed me the first time, but I've been on this trail many times before today. The whispers are not things that we should listen to, but despite that, or perhaps more likely because of that, they are beautifully melodic. I've heard riddles, insults, and compliments over the years, each one in a compellingly sweet tone. I've walked these paths so many times that by all rights I shouldn't have tripped. But whether due to them or my own poor coordination, I fall hard and slide down the slope to the left of the track. No matter how you look at it, I'm definitely off the path now. I hear giggling all around, though I can't see a single source. Oh yeah, you think you're funny. You really think you're clever? Your tricks are stupid, and you're stupid, and you just dash. The trees creak and I feel the pressure in the air change. The light shifts and I hear a cracking noise behind me. I spin round and I see her. Beautiful, horrific, and altogether inhuman. I sob as I fall to her feet. I didn't mean it. I whisper. I didn't mean it. It was just the last rule that I had not broken. I haven't been honest with you, I suppose. Not entirely. I told you of the rules that adults tell children in these parts, and I let you believe that I was told these myself, rather than only ever hearing them from parents who were actually concerned about their kids. I told you how I ate the berries and left off just how much I hoped they were a gift. That I tripped was perfectly true, but the additional truth that I had fully intended to purposefully leave the path at a later point would have shifted the tone somewhat. "Why did you come?" she asked me. Whilst parents told their children the rules of the woods, what mother who truly cared about their child's safety would not only fail to catch them but actively allow their child to walk this way time and time again? My mother told me that you take people and send them back all wrong, that a good, pure child had been taken from her, and I was sent back instead. There was a pause, and I could hear creaking as she breathed. That is not the truth of the matter. I know that. I know it. I have no memories of the woods before the age of 8, and she'd already started telling this story by then. So I know it's just a story and that I didn't come from here. But this is still where I want to be. I'd stopped crying, perhaps because there was no longer any point. I'd made my case, and she would either choose to accept me or she wouldn't. This choice cannot be undone, and our ways are not like the ones you've known. We are not what you might consider kind. I shrugged. Neither were they. All children learn the rules of the woods, but so too do all adults. They take alarming truths and flavor them with suspicion and fear. They use stories of the forest to hide truths from inside the village in a place that no neighbor will dare to scrutinize too carefully. It is true that the beings in the forest will steal those who break their simple rules. But it is also true that sometimes, every so often, there are those of us who want to be stolen.